Hello and welcome to the Warcraft Academy guide to playing a Retribution Paladin in patch 5.4. This guide was created by Dakishi, one of the best rep paladins in the world who raids in Scrubbusters. This guide is going to be very in-depth to teach you as much about the spec as possible, but you can use the menu along the top to skip to the section of the guide that you would like to see. Starting with your stat priorities, you'll want to get your hit and expertise up to the caps first, which is 7.5% for each. After that, you'll want to focus on your haste up until 50%. With the tier 16 4 set bonus, you only need 40% haste, which is 17,000 rating. The reason haste is so valuable is due to your Sanctity of Battle passive, which decreases the cooldown and global cooldown of several of your abilities. After haste, you want to focus on mastery, with crit as your lowest priority. Strength is a good stat on its own merit, but it should never be exclusively gemmed, since it's worse than all of your secondary stats at the 2-to-1 ratio found on gems. When you're gemming for Retribution, you want to focus on getting your best stats while still going for socket bonuses. Gems have twice as many secondary stats on as primary stats, which usually makes the secondary stats better. With this in mind, these are your gem choices. These combinations give you the highest amount of your best stats without causing you to lose socket bonuses. Now, sometimes a socket bonus may not be worth it, especially if it gives weak stats like crit, or requires you to use blue and red gems for a minor bonus. It's impossible to specify exactly when it isn't worth it without looking specifically at your character. You can use Simcraft as explained in our Simcraft tutorial to get an accurate idea, otherwise try to weigh up the amount of lost haste compared with the socket bonus you gain. Generally, a socket bonus that's plus 60 or less of any stat is not worth pursuing. These are the best enchants for Retribution. It's worth noting that if you're a tailor, you would replace the cloak enchant with sword guard embroidery, and you can only use the ring enchants if you're an enchanter. Currently the best professions for raiding are engineering and tailoring. So onto glyphs. When looking at glyphs, you have to look at the requirements of any given encounter and decide how it will benefit you. Most glyphs can be swapped out from encounter to encounter. Glyph of Templar's Verdict is the only glyph that should be considered mandatory, since 10% damage reduction is huge and will give you a lot of extra survivability. Glyph of Hand of Sacrifice removes the penalty from using Hand of Sacrifice, essentially turning it into a 30% damage reduction cooldown. Again, this is very good since you'll often be using this on the tank during high tank damage, which can be a major asset to your raid. For cleave fights, such as the Corcoran Dark Shaman, you can use the Glyph of Double Jeopardy for a DPS increase by alternating your judgment between each target. On more AoE fights, such as Spoils of Pandaria, you can use the Glyph of Mass Exorcism instead for an AoE DPS increase. Due to the range penalty, this would be a single target DPS loss on fights where you need to swap targets. Glyph of Divine Storm is also a powerful healing glyph, especially when used with the Divine Purpose and the tier 16 4 set. Glyph of Inquisition is also very strong on fights with a lot of adds, but it does require you to get the killing blow, which may not be very likely, particularly if you raid 25-man. Again, when looking at talents, you have to decide what will give you the biggest benefit to your raid. As a paladin, you have a lot of tools to support your raid, rather than only DPS. The first tier focuses on your movement. For PvE, you really have to pick between Speed of Light or Pursuit of Justice. Pursuit of Justice should be your default choice, since it'll provide the most DPS gain via increasing movement on average. However, in some situations you may need the Sprint, such as on Immersius to get into position quickly, or any other situation where you need to travel a long distance in a short time. Your second tier of talents is related to Crowd Control. The only talent here that has any real use for PvE is Fist of Justice. Using stuns regularly can be an asset to your raid by reducing the tank damage significantly, so you should be doing this on fights such as Spoils of Pandaria. Stuns can save a tank's life. The other talents in this tier are not useful for PvE. Tier 3 focuses on healing. In this tier, Selfless Healer should be your go-to talent. You can use it to instantly heal yourself in a lot of the life-threatening situations when you're low, and you'll have nearly 100% uptime on the buff. In Tier 4, your default talent is Unbreakable Spirit due to the massive survivability gain it provides. That said, you should not ignore the other talents. Hand of Purity is amazing on fights where you actually need dot damage reduction. It works on mechanics like the debuff that Iron Juggernaut places on your tank, and your healers will thank you for it. Likewise, on any fights where you need to be using your hand spells regularly, most likely Hand of Freedom or Sacrifice, Clemency will be very helpful. In Tier 5, you'll either be using Sanctified Wrath or Divine Purpose. Divine Purpose is better once you obtain your Tier 16 4 set bonus due to the obvious synergy it has. Before you get that, however, you'll get better results with Sanctified Wrath. The tier 6 talents provide situational DPS increases. Your default talent here is Execution Sentence, since it provides the highest single target DPS gain. Light's Hammer can be good in AoE situations, but it's very hard to get full benefit from it unless the targets will live for its full duration, so it's not really recommended to use. For your gear, there are a few important pieces you should be looking out for. Concerning trinkets specifically, Evil Eye of Galacrus and Thok's Tailtip are the best trinkets by far, better than all the others on any difficulty. Skier's Blood-Soaked Talisman is better than trinkets from other instances, but nowhere near as good as the other two. For weapons, the best one is the polearm from Thok, followed by the sword from Shah of Pride. After that, the mace from Nazgrim and the axe from Garrosh are approximately equal. For your other pieces, if you have the tier 15 4 set, you don't want to swap any pieces out until you get 4 pieces of tier 16, although this assumes you're going from heroic tier 15 to normal tier 16. If the item level jump is more significant, this won't apply, so don't worry about it too much. The 2 set bonus alone is not worth gearing for specifically, it's all about the 4 set. For off pieces, ideally you want to be using the legs from Garrosh. If you can't, the shoulders are a viable alternative. Protectors also drop some suitable shoulders, but they aren't quite as good. Playing Retribution is all about maximising your uptime and your holy power generation. Certain abilities generate holy power, and certain abilities consume it. Retribution Paladins can have up to 5 holy power at once, and your holy power consuming abilities will consume up to 3 each. Whilst you have under 5 holy power, you should prioritise abilities which generate holy power, with a few exceptions. You have 5 abilities that generate holy power. The first is Hammer of Wrath. It does holy damage to your current target and has a 30-yard range. This is your highest damaging holy power generator, and should be prioritised for single target when available. You can only use it on enemies that are below 20% or when you have Avenging Wrath active. Crusader Strike does physical damage to your target. It also triggers your mastery, Hand of Light, to do additional damage. This is your second strongest holy power generator and is therefore second on priority. It has a 4.5 second base cooldown, but that cooldown is reduced by your haste. Hammer of the Righteous is an ability which shares its cooldown with Crusader Strike, so you shouldn't use both. Hammer of the Righteous does damage to your target and other targets nearby, and so should be used instead of Crusader Strike if it will hit 2 or more targets. It has the same cooldown as Crusader Strike. Your fourth ability, Judgment, has a 30-yard range and deals damage to the target. This is the third most important holy power generator. It has a 6-second cooldown, again reduced by haste. Exorcism is your final holy power generator. It has a 30-yard range and does damage to your target. If you glyph it, it becomes limited to melee range, but does damage to your current target and every other target in 8 yards. So you have those 5 ways to generate holy power. You also have 4 ways to spend it. The first is Inquisition. This is a buff that increases your holy damage and crit chance whilst active, and it lasts longer the more stacks of holy power it consumes, up to 3 stacks. You need to keep extremely high uptime of this buff by using it with 3 holy power to keep it active. The second holy power consumer is Templar's Verdict. This is a damaging attack that deals very high physical damage to a single target. You can only use it if you have 3 holy power, and it also triggers your mastery to do additional damage. Third, you have Divine Storm. This does AoE damage within 8 yards of yourself, and requires 3 holy power to use. You'll be using this instead of Templar's Verdict on 2+ targets. Finally, you have Word of Glory. This is a healing ability but is also a DPS loss, so should only be used if you will die without that heal. So with your holy power consumers, you keep up Inquisition, and then use either Templar's Verdict or Divine Storm depending on the circumstance. In addition, you have 3 major cooldown abilities. Execution Sentence is a tier 6 talent. It does damage to a target slowly over 10 seconds on a 1-minute cooldown. Any trinkets that you have active at the time you use it will be snapshotted, so the Execution Sentence continues to benefit from them for its full duration. Avenging Wrath increases all damage and healing you do by 20%, and Guardian of Ancient Kings summons a Guardian to attack your current target. Whilst he's up, you'll gain stacks of Ancient Power, which increases your strength. Ancient Power can stack up to 12 times. If you use Execution Sentence at 20 stacks, it'll do a lot more damage. As a paladin, you also have seals, which are buffs you place on yourself. You can switch seals in combat, although this will use a global cooldown. As a ret, you should be using Seal of Truth in most situations. This causes your melee attacks to do extra damage to your target, and also leaves a stacking holy dot on targets you melee. This dot lasts for 15 seconds and stacks up to 5 times. which means with smart play you can stack it up to 5 on multiple targets and keep refreshing it to prevent it from falling off, which will result in a DPS gain. In situations where you have at least 4 mobs close together, you can use Seal of the Righteousness instead. However, if they're not going to live for at least 10 seconds or so, it's not really worth swapping. Finally, as a Rep Paladin, you have a huge arsenal of survivability and utility abilities. These won't increase your DPS, but they are all very important tools, and whether you use them will determine how good a Rep Paladin you are. Using these regularly will make your raids all the more successful as a result, whether by interrupting, providing raid cooldowns, or saving a raid member's life with a hand spell. Let's talk about your opening rotation. At the start of the fight, you should use a potion of Mogu's Strength just before you enter combat, and Judgment the boss as you run in. If you're using Speed of Light as a talent, use it now to close the gap into melee quickly. Next, use Exorcism as you run in, although if it's glyphed you won't be able to do this. Follow this up by running into melee range and Crusader Strike the boss. Next, activate Inquisition with 3 Holy Power, and activate Guardian of Ancient Kings and Avenging Wrath. Although, if you're using Divine Purpose, you should delay using your Avenging Wrath for 10 seconds. This is to sync it up with higher stacks of your Guardian of Ancient Kings. From here on, you start to follow your basic priority list, which looks something like this. There are add-ons out there that can help a ton with this, such as CLC Info, CLC Ret, or Weak Auras. So, to explain this a little, your highest priority is keeping up Inquisition with as close to 100% uptime as possible by refreshing it as close to it running out as possible with at least 3 Holy Power. If you refresh it when it has less than 2 seconds remaining, it will add the remaining duration onto the new cast. So if you cast it with 1 second remaining, it will last for 61 seconds. So you always want to be tracking its duration. You can use an add-on like Weak Auras to do this. Next, you should be using Execution Sentence on cooldown. You can delay this for a few seconds if needed, such as if you have an ICD trinket about to come off cooldown, or if you want to build up additional stacks of Guardian of Ancient Kings, or to use it with Avenging Wrath. If you activate it whilst one of these buffs is active, it will continue to benefit from it for the entire duration of the execution sentence, even if the buff falls off. The next priority is to do with the Tier 16 4-set bonus. If you don't have the Tier 16 4-set, you can ignore this part. Basically, you want to be using Divine Storm whenever the tier procs and you have 5 Holy Power. You should only use it with less than 5 Holy Power if the proc is going to expire before you can get to 5 Holy Power. Templar's Verdict is next on priority, again with 5 Holy Power when possible. Now to explain, Templar's Verdict only needs 3 Holy Power to do max damage, and it will only ever consume 3. However, as long as you're not capped on Holy Power, it's better to delay using it in order to continue using abilities that generate Holy Power instead. This will maximise the amount of Holy Power you gain over an encounter, and will ensure Holy Power is never wasted. If you get to the point where all of your Holy Power generators are on cooldown and you have at least 3 Holy Power, it's fine to use Templar's Verdict in that instance since you have an empty global cooldown. Next, you need to ensure to use your Divine Purpose procs if you're using that talent. You should save these until you get to 5 Holy Power ideally, but you can also use them if you get a spare global cooldown or if the buff is about to expire. Don't ever waste a proc by not using it. After that, you have your Holy Power generator abilities in the priority of Hammer of Wrath, Crusader Strike, Judgment, and then Exorcism. And the very bottom of your priority list is Templar's Verdict again, with less than 5 Holy Power assuming that everything else is already on cooldown. The general idea behind this priority is to only use your Holy Power consumers at 5 Holy Power whenever possible, but never wasting a global cooldown and never wasting a proc. On 2 or more targets you perform the same basic rotation. The only differences are that you replace Crusader Strike with Hammer of the Righteous, and replace Templar's Verdict with Divine Storm. As soon as you get at least 2 targets, this is more optimal. You should also be alternating your auto attacks on different targets as you try to build up stacks of Censure on at least 3 targets, trying never to let a stack fall off. In general, always sync up your Avenging Wrath and Guardian of Ancient Kings. If you're not using Sanctified Wrath, Avenging Wrath lasts for 20 seconds and Guardian lasts for 30. You want to use Avenging Wrath when Guardian has 20 seconds remaining so that you get a full benefit from it. If you can use Execution Sentence at full stacks of Guardian, you'll notice a significant damage gain. Thank you very much for watching this guide. If you're interested in getting lessons from Takeshi directly on how to play Ret or improve your gameplay, click on screen now for more information. Please rate, comment and subscribe to let us know what you think.